morning, everybody. Good morning. Just checking to see, there we go. Good morning, everybody, and welcome. Welcome to Community Unitarian Universalist Church. We are so glad that you are here this morning. My name is Jeannette, Baillie, and I am one of the worship associates here at the church. This church, like all Unitarian Universalist congregations, is founded on a common vision rather than a required creed. The belief we all share is the conviction that every single person on earth has inherent worth and dignity and deserves to be treated with kindness. And the mission we share is to nourish spirits, work for justice, and transform lives. Our returning guest speaker this morning is Dr. David Utsler. We are so grateful that he is back in our pulpit today. David is a writer and published author, mostly snooze-worthy academic stuff. Those are his words, that they're snooze-worthy. And he has been a resident of the state of Texas since 2004. David received his PhD in philosophy from the University of North Texas. One of his areas of specialization is environmental philosophy and ethics, and especially how environmental concerns intersect with social justice. When David is not sitting around thinking about things, he enjoys reading, music, attempting to grow vegetables, and cooking. David is also committed to standing with the LGBTQ+ community to defend their human rights, dignity, and freedoms. Please welcome David Utsler.
It's good to be back. I'm always happy when I get an email from Jeannette or Sarah. Always makes me smile. So I thought, what am I going to talk about this time? And I was thinking about it, and I thought about the last time I was here, and I think I talked about environmental destruction, death, just wasn't real cheery. So I thought, I need to do something a little cheerier. And belonging, that's a good theme, so I'll do that. So I got to thinking about it and what I would say, and I started thinking about all the things going on in the world. So, what's going on in the Middle East, Ukraine. I even thought about the event here in your own church a few months ago or whatever with the firebomb at the door. And, I thought, Communitarian Universalist Church, they help the homeless, have a food pantry, collected 260 hams. Terrible people, certainly. Somebody should stop you. So I guess what I'm saying is I don't know if this is going to be any cheerier than last time or not. So this might be my last invite. We'll see. But I'll try to spice it up, make it a little cheery. At first I wrote it out, and then I didn't like it. I thought I'm just going to wing it, So I'm as curious as to what I'm going to say as some of you might be. But I'll try to stick to what I wrote here. So of course you have to come up with a catchy title. Right? It's a little play on Shakespeare. To be long or not to belong, between hostility and hospitality. So we've all likely heard those famous lines from William Shakespeare's tragic play Hamlet. When the young troubled protagonist asks to be or not to be, that is the question. But in my experience, every question leads to another question. As a philosopher, that's why I have a job. Assuming our choice is to be, even in the face of all the troubles, anguish, and darkness in the world today, perhaps the next question we might ask is how we want to be. What kind of person will I be in this world? Such questions matter to a reflective person. Here I would say that we're all called to be philosophers and to live the philosophical life. I do not mean that you should all run out and pursue a PhD in philosophy. And if you have any temptation that you might want to do that, please talk to me afterwards so I can discourage you. I had a student time after about halfway through the semester say to me, I think I'm going to change my major to philosophy. And I didn't know whether, to warn her, don't do it. Not if you want a job, But to be happy that someone's life was so changed by living the examined life. But anyway, but to be a philosopher for all of us means to be a lover of wisdom. That's what the etymology of the word is. In Plato's dialogue Apology, Socrates says at the end of his trial, "Let no day pass without discussing goodness and all the subject about which you hear me talking and examining both myself and others, for the unexamined life is not worth living." When I teach this passage to my students, I like to rephrase it to say the unexamined life is never really lived. So, to be or not to be? Yes, to be. To examine my life as to have a life worth living? A life that is really lived? Again, yes. To put it in more contemporary terms, the philosopher Robert Nozick wrote that deep down, what we all want is a life and a self that happiness is a fitting response to, and then to give it that response. Another question that follows along this line of thinking is the one I have placed in my title, to belong or not to belong. We human beings are naturally communal and want a sense of belonging. I would argue that each and every human being deserves a sense of belonging somewhere, and that fundamental sense of belonging should be that feeling of belonging within our shared humanity. However it is you wish to create your life and being, you should be able to do that without being excluded from belonging to a shared humanity. And neither should a shared humanity exclude you from what flavor of human being you are or wish to be. I guess I'm an idealist. I once heard a wise man say that to be an idealist, you should be ready to be disappointed a lot. I'm okay with that. I would rather be an idealist and set the bar high even if I fall short of it. That is better than setting the bar low and achieving it, yet settling for much less than what we might have attained. So, as long as we human beings exist, and I exist among them, I'm going to be hopeful that we will esteem one another in our common humanity. And even when that hope is not entirely realized, and even if the world seems to have more darkness than light, I would rather do good and be good and contribute at least something in the good column. For every good that we do not do is to add something to the evil column. By way of personal anecdote, a few years back, I lost a very dear friend. It was a random accident in her home. She was 42, lived alone. Apparently she had slipped and hit her head. She had taken some migraine medicine in hopes of alleviating the pain. She crawled in bed, pulled up the covers, and drifted to sleep. And she never woke up. Well, of course, all of her friends, we were devastated when we got the news. One of her friends took the news particularly hard. To his mind, without her in the world, there was no goodness in the world at all. So one day he posted on social media that he had read that morning in the news that a man at DFW had shot his wife and son, then turned the gun on himself. He said, no matter what we do or how hard we try, we cannot overcome evil, so I'm going to quit trying. Now, I understood that he was speaking from grief. But being a philosopher, which is to say being an innately irritating individual, I couldn't help but to look at what his words, taken at face value, logically implied. It would seem that the sole purpose of doing good is to eradicate evil. And if evil cannot be eradicated entirely, then what is the point of doing good? His despair is not unique to him. Have we all not had those moments where we just wanted to throw our hands up in the air and give up? Doesn't matter what we do, things are not going to change. But what if the purpose of doing good was just to do good, because good was good to do? See, evil needs good to be evil, but good does not need evil to be good. If there were no evil in the world at all, the good would still make sense all on its own. But if there were nothing in the world but evil, evil would still need the good for us to know that evil is evil. Evil is a parasite. It is derivative. The greatest of all weakness is evil. So, with that backdrop, let me return to the ideal of belonging. I probably ought to talk about what I said I was going to talk about. Like I said, my mind just goes off in about 1,000 different directions, and it's kind of like that Robert Frost poem, way leads to way, and I know I'll never return. That's how my mind works. So, you and I, we want to belong. We want people to accept us as we are. We want to look at the world that surrounds and have a sense of place, a sense of home. But the world has always been and seems to be increasingly today a place of exclusion. You must look the right way, think the right way, believe the right things, be the right sexual orientation, dress the right way, and so on and on. I've never had the experience of exclusion based on who I am. Well, I was always one of those kids in high school that never quite fit in. I was weird. Still am. Nerdy. I was into things that no teenager in a small rural community was into. But other than getting looked at a little strangely or maybe laughed at, I never felt physically threatened. Like so many do who just want to live their lives and have the same acceptance in society that others have. So, as a side note, you will hear some people say, I don't care how those people live their lives. I just don't want it shoved down my throat. But by shoved down their throat, they mean to be seen in society.
Amen. So, to belong or not to belong, between hostility and hospitality. Now, I'll admit here that the ideas of hostility and hospitality, I shamelessly stole from another thinker. Boston College philosophy professor Richard Carney has written a lot on hostility and hospitality, and I have no original ideas in what I'm about to say. Those two words represent two absolutely opposite dispositions toward others, yet they come from the same root. Think of it this way. When you are a host at your home, you have hospitality. To a point. Please come in and make yourself at home, but don't put your shoes on the furniture, stay out of that room, wash your hands if you sneeze, and so forth. When welcoming a guest, there is always a tension between hospitality and hostility. But it seems to me the hostility that is so present in the world today is based on a mistake. There are those who are under the illusion that they are hosts, and it is their call whether to be hospitable or hostile to others. But what if each and every one of us, each and every person in power began to see what the philosopher Hans Georg Gadamer so wisely observed when he said that our experience of the other, quote, is not something outside that desires admission. Rather, we are possessed by something, and precisely by means of it, we are opened up for the new, the different, and the true, end quote. You see, this world belongs to no one to determine who is or who is not worthy of being a guest. We are all guests of one another. The UC Berkeley professor Judith Butler, incidentally, Judith Butler was also the thinker that was one of the very first, long before kind of medical affirmation and things that began to distinguish between sex and gender in her work many, many years ago. And later, the medical science confirmed what she had discovered philosophically. But she recently wrote of the phenomenon of the COVID-19 pandemic that it implicates each of us in an interconnected world. A world of living creatures whose capacity to affect one another and to be affected by one another can be a matter of life or death. Death and illness, she says, have been quite literally in the air. You remember when you were like little, or maybe you had kids that did this, you're on vacation, and there's like you sit on this side and you sit on that side with the kids and stay out of each other's space. And, children always finding creative ways to be irritating.
Mom, Dad, he's breathing my air. Well, that's what we do. We share the air. How ironic that a pandemic, from pandemos, meaning all the people or the people everywhere, brought to light that we are all utterly dependent on a world that we all share. Butler described a hope that I think many of us had, that the pandemic would wake us up to live in the world differently than we do. There was talk about that, the new normal and all these changes. But she wrote, as such, it is a way of living life with the assumptions that one's life has value, a value beyond market value, that the world will be structured to facilitate one's flourishing, and that this happens or will happen not only for oneself, but for everyone else as well. But again, we idealists were being set up for disappointment. Even in the midst of the pandemic, the market value of persons who lived in what Butler calls marginal zones of life outside of the commons, language is revealing here. Unskilled laborers all of a sudden became essential workers. I think this was supposed to make laborers, who we justify paying poor wages because their labor is unskilled, feel important and necessary to our way of life. But I never heard anyone ask, essential for what? Essential to whom? On one hand, essential workers made it possible for needful things, such as going to the grocery store on a quest for toilet paper. Sometimes hours-long quest, as I recall. But what I heard again and again is the need that we open back up for the sake of the economy and our way of life. I want to go to restaurants, bars, and movies, and so on. Rather than a spirit of hospitality toward all fellow humans in the midst of a deadly pandemic, we heard, I thought I lived in a free country. You can't make me wear a mask. Hostility rather than hospitality. And by the way, are you getting depressed yet? Is this dark enough? No. Now that things are back to normal and the world is pretty much opened up, when was the last time you heard the term essential workers? Mm-hmm. Me neither. Yeah. I suspect everyone sitting here wants what I do, a world characterized by the spirit of hospitality, a welcoming place of belonging for everyone, to be and to belong. As I'm speaking to you today, not merely in the abstract, but with a great deal of concern caused by a world seemingly out of control. I was just at a conference in Canada, and one evening texting with my wife, she said, you're up kind of late for you, And I said, well, I'm thinking about the Middle East, It's like, is he watching TV or is he got caught up in a book? No, he's thinking about the Middle East. Ukraine? How bad will things get in the Middle East and in Ukraine? What of the orchestrated attempts in our own country to undermine democracy? There are many reasons to be tempted to despair. And despair is deadly because it asserts that there is no hope. That's when you despair, right? When you don't think that you can turn the corner. So my friend, Professor Brian Traynor, Loyola Marymount University in Los Angeles, wrote, reality seems to counsel despair, and we are all seemingly all too ready to heed that counsel. But is despair the last word or the only word? And here I'm going to, without any shame at all whatsoever, promote Brian's book. If you read only one more book in 2023, read Melancholic Joy on Life Worth Living. That's a masterpiece. I thought it was, it's Brian, so I thought it's another academic book. And so I got my pencil out and I began to read it, and I put my pencil down and, read through the whole thing in just a day or two. Very accessible masterpiece, and I think it really speaks to our world today. I don't get anything from the book from Brian. He doesn't pay me.
This is an unpaid endorsement.
Entirely unpaid endorsement. It's just the book so moved me. It just happened to be written by a friend of mine. For the record, being an academic book, Brian doesn't get paid anything either. We're not exactly, New York Times bestsellers. Yeah, I just got there's a book I co-edited 10 years ago. And just got from the publisher my royalty statement, right? And I'm actually in the black. I actually have royalties coming to me, but it has to reach a certain amount before they pay out. And I figure where I'm at right now, in 10 years, I ought to get my first royalty check from that book roughly, what year is this, 2023, about 2050, I'm estimating? Yeah. So, anyway. So yeah, like he said, reality does seem to counsel despair, and that can be, the temptation. One of the articles that I have my students read is called The Experience Machine. And it's about this thing that if you plug into it, you'll get all the internal feelings you get from experiences that make you happy, right? And so the question is, do only those internal feelings matter to us? He says, no, we actually want to do and experience. Like I ask my students, do you want to, have the feeling of eating a chocolate ice cream cone? Or do you want to actually eat the chocolate ice cream cone? And occasionally I will have the student that's like, this experience machine sounds like a good thing to do. I would like that, And so they're on that brink of despair sometimes. But despair doesn't have the last word. Darkness doesn't have the last word. So what I want to leave you with is this actually is original, I think. If somebody else said it, I didn't take it from them. I just came up with it too. The tenacity of hope. Not a naive hope that behaves as if the darkness does not exist, right? Go see a motivational speaker. Everything in the world is wonderful if only you make it that way. But darkness, as I said, does not have the last word. So a few more words to leave you with from Brian's book. The proper response to the fullness of reality is melancholic joy, what he calls a second naivete. To assert that, despite it all, life is worth it. And to do so with full attention to both the desolation and the consolation. The joy toward which I am pointing is not the joy of innocence, but the joy of experience. Although the glory of the world passes, while we live, let us live. So, that's the kind of world that I want to belong to, and I hope that you do too. Thank you.
Thank you so much, David.
And if you're confused about whether to leave, depressed or happy, welcome to philosophy.
Well, that was delightful. Thank you so much, David.